Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard their point. Now, hear the counterpoint on Libertarian Counterpoint podcasts.
And thank you for joining us this evening. We have a special conversation with my friend and colleague, Oscar Herrera. Oscar, last time we got to talk to you it was almost a year ago now, wasn't it? And we were kind of in the dog days of that campaign. And you are now a seasoned politician because you had a 3-year, it was almost a 3-year campaign, wasn't it?
A
little over 2?
Yeah, no. I mean, I thought about it for a long time, but no, I was not in the running for that long.
No, once you start once you start seriously thinking about it, it becomes a weight on your head, and that's when I start.
Yeah.
So whenever you start thinking about it,
Yeah.
that's when I personally start the clock. So,
Yeah.
so my clock is a little bit longer than other people's. I don't wait for the paperwork. I wait when you start mentally working on yourself, because that's when the weight starts to hit you.
Yeah,
and
that was a good 2.5 years then.
So a good 2.5-year run. That's a long time. Mine was about a year. Because I did kind of the short one. No one else was running against my opponent, and so we did a quick write-in campaign. Slipped in the top 2, and got to be on the candidacy. Very few libertarians get to achieve their ultimate goal. I got about 26% in a 2-person race. It's hard to know this year how well that is. Other libertarians in California got about 11%, but they were in a more difficult district than I was. So it's hard to know if I got, the anti-vote, or, it's just hard to know. So where'd you end up?
I got 3.2% of the vote,
Mm-hmm.
which was the average across all Ohio candidates, was above 3%. Kind of wish the top of the ticket got 3%, because that would have retained its ballot access. But whatever. I mean, we're not afraid of the work.
Yeah, clearly, Oscar's never been afraid of the work, and which brings us to actually my other point. You announced yesterday that you've joined the National Guard, the Ohio National Guard. Congratulations! You've always been a young man who looked like he wanted to help his community for more than himself. And I think anything anybody does to kind of go down that path, I always the National Guard, military, I'm far too much of a hippie for that. So people who can actually do that, I appreciate. We need those kind of things.
Yeah, it's something I've been wanting to do for years. I tried when I was 17, 18, didn't pass the physical component of it. Now that I'm a little bit older, wiser, not still young at heart and in age, but it was, post-election life kind of gives you some clarity too.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was like, you know what? I need something to motivate me, keep me disciplined, because it's kind of, when you're in campaign mode, that keeps you accountable, disciplined, and everything. And now that I'm kind of free from that constraint in a way, I needed something that would give me one, discipline, training, but also just consistency throughout the next few years. So, because when, I don't know for you, but there was stuff I had to do on a weekly basis on the campaign trail, and my mindset was I have to do this on a Thursday, and to the point where now, let's say it's January now, my mindset's still there, that I'm I could be at the gym and I can't stay another half hour because I have to do this. I'm like, oh wait, that's over with.
Yeah.
So
well, that is true. The campaign trail it's a tough task, and especially when you've been on it for a long time. Even I figure mine's short. I watched a lot of you guys, out there working for these years, running the campaigns for literally years. I'm going, I don't know how y'all do it. I really don't. So I appreciate you guys. It takes the energy of youth. I don't know how people my age are out there running for office. It's a physical and mental drain. And speaking of that mental drain, when the campaign was over and that weight was lifted, for me, it took a while for me to kind of readjust back to normal life. Did you have kind of that same problem?
Yeah, I did. It was the day of the election, I was very nervous. Early numbers weren't good for me, so I was kind of you beat yourself up because you're like, I could have done this, I could have done that, a little bit more effort. But at the end of the day, I just told myself, I did the best I could. First campaign ever. Virtually no name recognition going in, obviously, compared to my other two opponents who are a little bit more established in the community. And I'm just like, 3%, it's a start. It's not the number I wanted, but it's a start for greater things. And, it was just weird having a lot of open time because you're not doing interviews, you're not doing podcasts, you're not calling people, knocking doors. So it's like adjusting yourself to pretty much it's like losing a job. Like, what do you do now?
Yeah, kind of, because there's this whole section of your thought process that no longer has to function. You no longer have to always think like a politician. Now, I've got, the TV show, and I'm chair of the Libertarian Party, and, you don't have any of that to kind of fill some of that. But I ended up having to take a break. I kind of did kind of my minimal political activities for about, almost 2 months. I think I almost ended up having to take a break. And part of that was just so I could absorb the experience and kind of learn some lessons. I was like, what have I learned? Because I learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about my community. I learned a lot about how politics actually works versus how we all kind of think it works. And trying to kind of absorb all that and take your lessons. And so you can go back and you can talk to, in our case, fellow libertarians or your community and say, well, what have we learned? Like, one of the things that struck me is that during my campaign, my biggest issues that kind of resonated had nothing to do with the pandemic. It had nothing to do with racial justice, despite those being big, huge issues. It was basics. It was transparency and accountability from bureaucracy. And it was water issues. The single biggest issue I had was basic issues with the water board and issues with transparency, just wanting to know what's going on. Mm-hmm. And those were the two single biggest issues in my campaign. So what did you kind of learn about something like that?
I think on the campaign side, I learned that I needed to be more reliant on other people and just have a little bit more hands-off approach. I like to micromanage a lot. Like, I like to have my input in every little thing. That's just how I am. But coming back, I'm like, maybe I should have just trusted the people in my campaign a little bit more on just like a little bit more free reign on some stuff. But for next time, I'll remember that. But like on the issue side, like, it was very hard to like, I was the first libertarian a lot of people ran into. Mm-hmm. If you probably ran into that same circumstances, they're like, what's a libertarian? And you do your best to explain. And in my public appearances, I would always do like, hey, my name's Oscar, I'm the Libertarian candidate. If you don't know what a libertarian is, and I just ran out over key issues. Do you believe in economic prosperity? Yes. Do you believe in individual liberty? Yes. And just 2 or 3 other points. I'm like, all right, since all of you guys raised your hands, you're all libertarians now, and I look forward to your vote in November. And I got a really good response to that. I got a few people from the Democrats and Republicans saying yes to my questions. I got one of my opponents to admit he was a libertarian. And when I saw that, I'm like, and I see my Republican opponent admit to being a libertarian. And I'm looking forward to him dropping out and endorsing me. Just a little jab in there.
Little place of fun. Yeah.
Just to like add some levity to the room. And
well, especially this year, right? This year was so toxic. If libertarians if libertarians couldn't be the adults in the room and have some fun and be the non-toxic part of the environment, we were doing something wrong, right? If we kind of joined the toxic part of the politics, I think we were doing something wrong. That was actually, for me, one of the best parts of being about libertarian this last year, is that for the most part, we didn't take part in the toxic nature of the politics. It's not saying we didn't participate in any, because that would be a lie, right? We did have some, and we're human. We get caught up in our emotions just like anybody else. And you have moments or days where you say things or you behave in ways where a week later you're going, I probably should have approached that differently. And as a campaign, when you're running a campaign, that's very dangerous, because I know I do. I don't know if you saw, I did videos often 3-4 times a week, short 5-10 minute videos. And I'd have a little thing. Okay, I'm going to get up there and talk about something today. And then when the camera was gone, she'd point to me and I'd talk about something completely different because whatever was on my mind. And so I had very difficult time with that political filter. Now, luckily, I have the public access filter from, my TV training. And so I keep everything I don't cross any boundaries. But someone who didn't have that public access TV training could end up in a trouble finding themselves. Did you find having to censor? It's not even censor is probably the wrong word. To manage your words more carefully.
Oh, yeah.
Was that a challenge for you?
It was somewhat of a challenge because, like, especially part of what I was kind of preaching, for lack of a better term, was like, we need to be better, hold our politicians more accountable, that they're responsible for their words. And we're seeing that now, especially with the Capitol Hill raid that went on. Mm-hmm. That I was very mindful of, like, exactly of every single word I said, because, like, at the end of the day, I'm a public figure. And so what I say matters a little bit more than the average person. So you have to really sit back and reflect, have a little bit of prudence in a way, mm-hmm. because your words do mean something. And I didn't want anything to be taken the wrong way. Like, any statements I wrote, like, I really meditated on. Interviews, like, I hate that I wasn't as quick to say something, but at the same time, I was thinking, what's the best way I could say this? Because you don't want to give anyone any ammunition against you as well. I mean, so if people do have fault with what you say, if you're sure about it's the right thing, you could just say, what exactly do you have fault with? And if they can't say it, then you did your job. Now, sometimes people would say, you could have said this a little bit better. There's always that, but
yeah, or the people can disagree, but that's fine. Yeah. Honorable people can have honorable disagreements, right? Mm-hmm. You're not. It's not a world where, as long as you're not toxic, then we can always have a discussion. It's when things get toxic, and is when our discussions try to disintegrate, I shall we say, into this point where we're not even talking politically. We're not even talking to each other anymore. We're talking past each other. We're talking at each other, and as the third party candidates and anybody outside of the political system, it's, we're going to have to be the ones to say, you know what, we're just not going to participate in that. We're going to go over here. We're going to kind of do our thing the right way and just hope we attract people who are just getting tired of that. Because I don't think, as libertarians, green parties, peace and freedom party, regardless of what your politicians are, what your political policies are, is this toxic nature, this nature where we are so afraid of what our fellow Americans are going to do. We no longer talk to them to find out what they actually want to do. We kind of create this sense of what we think they want to do. And I was watching Jordan Peterson lecture the other day, one of his old class lectures. I mean, the literally 2-hour long psychology class. And he was talking about how instinctively what we like to do is, as people, is we like to take someone's argument and we create the weakest version of it as possible. And then we knock it down. That's what the straw man argument is. And then we go and we knock it down. And yay, we knock down their weakest part of the argument, rather than trying to figure out what they're actually trying to say and then repeat it back to them stronger. And then say, but here's why I disagree with it. Mm-hmm. So instead of fighting the weakest version of their argument, we're fighting the best version of their argument. And one of the ways I've tried to do that in my campaign is, rather than libertarians, we like to talk a lot about localism, right? But when we talk about localism, other people don't hear us. So when I switched it here, I've called it organic communities. It's the exact same thing as localism, but it's said in a way that the people in my neighborhood can hear it. Mm-hmm. So instead of talking past them, localism, we need limited government, we need small government, I'm saying we needed organic communities where people of small neighborhoods get to have the determination of what happens in their neighborhoods. And it's the same argument, but it's said in a way that they can understand. That's how we fight gentrification. And so for me, finding a way to communicate with the wider audience in a non-libertarian way, but also using libertarian principles behind it. Did you ever find a way to kind of do that? If you can follow that, I know that was kind of a long-winded
No,
bouncing
I
around
get
way.
what you're trying to say. Like I found myself using, in a way, the language that Republicans use and Democrats use, because one, I've been in both camps in a way politically, so I kind of understand when, for example, like rule of law, what does that mean? And for the Republicans, because I know they love saying that. And then for Democrats, what does on diversity, racism, and all that stuff talk their points? And I found it very fruitful because we kind of were on the same page about the proper role of the law, and then on the issue of racism and having minorities participate. And they kind of got behind all that because I was speaking their language. And I'm not saying I'm a great libertarian spokesperson where I could tell you every little fine detail about libertarianism, but I found great success talking to established Democrats and established Republicans because I'm like, I get their language, I know what they're talking about, and approached it on their side. Like, for example, I got asked about criminal justice reform from a Republican. He's like, oh, what about this defund the police stuff? Because that's all he knew. And I'm like, well, I get what they're, and I tried to explain the left perspective on defund the police. And I told him, well, this is the proper role of the police. And I gave him like a 1-minute elevator pitch. And he was like, I could get behind that. I like what you're saying. You're making sense. And,
Yeah.
And then he starts bashing the other side, and I'm just like, whatever. Like,
and then you go back to their old habits. It's like defund the police. It's not really defunding the police. It's demilitarizing them, and then shifting the money they no longer need to the services that help prevent the bigger things. It's not like you're taking money away. You're just, it's no longer needed because you don't have to pay for the armored cars and the and all this. And SWAT teams and all this various things. You don't need a whole bunch of them. You only need a handful of these things. And so you actually save a lot of money by demilitarizing the police. And you also would help, with the relationship between the police and the public by having simpler, more laws that are able to follow. So the police don't even know what the laws are. How, we don't know what the laws are. There's so many of them. What was it? There was a book 10 years ago that you accidentally committed 3 felonies a day. The average person accidentally commits 3 felonies a day. And it's got to be worse by now.
Probably up to 5 now.
And then we talk about rule of law. My always question when people talk to me about rule of law is, in the United States, the difference between the United States and other countries when it comes to the rule of law is the United States, for all other countries, for all of time, the average citizen has always had to abide by the rule of law. The average citizen has never gotten out of the rule of law. The difference in the United States was the government and their officials were supposed to be held accountable to the rule of law. They weren't supposed to have a different set of rules. And that's what has been lost. And so one of the first things you need to do to regain some trust among the political class, be it police or the politicians, is actually start reinforcing that rule of law on the political class. I think that's... goes right back to the transparency issue where we hit is that people are tired of, it's like Animal Farm. It's like, they're the pigs and we're everybody else.
Some animals are more equal than others.
Yeah, all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. And it's that frustration. Even people who are politically different than me, who had no intent on voting for me, would agree with me on the need for even a radical transparency, a radical view on transparency. My actually single biggest video was radical transparency. It was when I sat there and had to talk about radical transparency, and that accountability does not necessarily mean punishment. It means making sure you understand what the hell happened so you can fix it. Because, you can't fix it until you understand what actually happened. And you can't actually understand what happened until you hold yourself accountable. It's not actually about holding other people accountable. It's holding yourself accountable. And by holding yourself accountable and telling the public that, here, look, this is what I did to screw up, and here's what we're going to do to kind of work our way through it, that builds trust. And I don't know about you, but like EDD here in California, there's 1.4 million of us who haven't had an unemployment check in 6 weeks. And I've got libertarians who are coming to me saying, what are we supposed to do? I've maxed out my credit cards. I've avoided, going on public aid, but they've closed my businesses down. I can't, I'm at the end of my rope. and now I'm supposed to trust this. And so, going, well, you've paid all this money in, so don't feel bad about getting it. You've paid the money in for the system, right? And they're going to give it to you anyway, so you might as well take it. They destroyed your business. They took, and this is compensation. So don't feel guilty. If you want to feel anything, feel that they're not giving you back enough. Okay, so if you're going to do that, they're not recompensating you enough. If you're going to feel angry, and I get that you're going to be disappointed and you're going to be reluctant to get to the services that you pay for, but as a politician, as a libertarian politician, we do have that issue because we have to represent everybody. That includes libertarians who are extremely, reluctant to interface with government. And that includes people who want the government or have become dependent on government, and we have to help them too. And trying to find that line as a libertarian is difficult because we all want to go where the end game of libertarianism is, right? I do too. But how the heck do we actually get there without hurting people? Yeah. You can't just pull the rug out from under people. And that's actually the hardest part of the discussion is I'm trying to have with people is that, no, most libertarian politicians don't want to just flip a switch and throw people out. We want to unwind this thing. And did you have to have that kind of conversation? And has your view on that kind of evolved?
I really haven't had that welfare discussion with anyone on the campaign trail, thankfully, because because a lot of people here are reliant on aid, food stamps, health, Medicaid, especially being an older generation, the majority of the people that live here. So they're on their Medicare and Medicaid and all that. So it's to tell them like, yo, you shouldn't have access to these services. And then their automatic response is like, well, I paid into it with my taxes, so I should get. And I mean, they make a compelling. Obviously, if you pay into something, you should get something in return. So, and then I always say, well, we could reform it so we can make it cheaper, so it costs less for you, and also better quality and all that. But yeah, there's always going to be a social safety net. That's something that's never going to go away, at least in my lifetime. Is it going to take different forms? I believe so. I think UBI is gaining a lot of steam recently, like thanks to Andrew Yang and his proposal and the stimulus checks we've been receiving. And I think a complete overhaul of welfare and replace it with UBI seems like the most logical thing that's going to happen, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. Just because, one, it's just blanket to every American that qualifies. Just like, here's one check a month, boom. Versus all these hoops and ladders, different levels of monetary aid that people are getting. Some people get like, let's say $200 a month, others get like $1,000 a month. And so just blanket, let's say $1,200.
Yeah, it simplifies the process, right? If you're going to do it, make it simple. It's
like, and then kind of, I always found it in a way odd and kind of infuriating that the more kids you have, the more aid you get. So it kind of encourages that. And people are going to say, like, you sound like a conservative when you say that. Like, you just don't want to feed all these kids. And I'm like, yes, I mean, some people have kids that they can't feed and whatever, but we should also not encourage just popping out babies so you can receive more money.
Yeah, it's that competing morality thing, right? You've got this thing, you want to help people and you don't really have a problem with it, but at the same time, you can see the potential moral hazard, and how often it actually happens, it's hard to know, but you can see that potential moral hazard. And so it's just, you're sitting there going, you really don't know what to do about it. It's that competing morality. For some strange reason, that came up with a lot in my campaign is how do we deal with these competing moralities? Whether it was CPS, you're dealing with, CPS because you've got CPS becomes abusive and incompetent at the same time. And so how do you deal with that? And that's actually one of the most difficult things. There's no good answer. There's literally no good answer in dealing with like child protection services, because you do need some form of child protection services. And they do have a history of becoming abusive. How the heck do you resolve those two? And there's literally no good answer. I know people who work inside of CPS. I've kind of been on both sides of the of the issues. I've seen, all sides, literally all sides of that issue. And so I'm going, there's no good answer. And I'm sitting here trying to talk to people, talk to voters about it and be honest with them and say, look, there's no good answer. All we can really do is put the best policies in place and make sure that we mind those policies to a T and adjust them as needed. And, that's really all we can do. And keep an eye on it, because you can't even have transparency in CPS because you're dealing with children and families. And so the oversight has to be done a level above. And so it makes it even harder to oversight, but there's no other way to do it. And so when we think all this way through, and what I found is that people were happy I was willing to have the difficult conversation. Even though I didn't have any answers for them, they were happy I was willing to sit there and say, look, here's the problems we're facing. And here's why this is so difficult to get answers for, because there's no freaking good answers. And if anybody tries to tell you there's a silver bullet answer, they're lying to you. And you go through and here's the problems. And just being willing to tell people what the real problems were and that there was no good solution, they were actually, I wasn't going to say happy about it, but they were satisfied.
Mm-hmm.
And
well, the competing morality is the hardest thing, because it's like, it's at the end of the day, it's like what I do in those situations, like what causes the least amount of harm. And because at the end of the day, that's what libertarians are about, the least amount of harm on the individual. And on CPS, like, yeah, I have activist friends on Facebook that are very in tune to the CPS, all these reforms and everything. You're like, oh man, there's these horror stories after horror stories. And you're like, yeah, maybe it would be good to abolish it. And then you see horror stories that happens to children, and you're like, yeah, we do need some mechanism in place to protect them, to protect our families, the most vulnerable in our society, and all that.
Yeah, I've been reading a book, for those of you who might be interested. It's the Foster Care Handbook. Oh man, I'll have to put the link in the thing. And the author, she went through the foster care system, and she wishes she was been pulled out of her family sooner. And we can't ignore that experience either. And so there's the reality is both things can be true. And how do we solve this problem? And that's the tough thing for politicians. And I think that's where the area where libertarians can live. If we want to make some, if libertarians really want to make some hay, you got to go where no one else is working. It's kind of like the money ball of politics. Right? Don't do what everybody else is doing. Do what they're not doing. And so if they're not being open, honest, and having real discussions, then we need to sit there and be open, honest, and having real discussions. If they're being toxic, we need to be loving. And luckily that's our nature anyway. We don't want to be toxic. We don't like that. I mean, yeah, okay, we've got our edgelords and whatever they want to call themselves.
Yeah, we got our captain characters.
We've got the group, but for the most part, they're just out for laughs. They're not actually out being toxic. Now you can say it reaches a toxic level, but for the most part, they're just out for laughs. But
yeah, I think the LP, from what I've seen, especially in like the last 2 years, has been really good at accountability and keeping everyone in check. Especially seeing how much more high profile we're becoming, especially in the wake of the 2016 election. And I think partly is because of the leadership we've experienced with Joe Bishop Henchman and the likes of them. We have a good LNC, and I've been noticing a better. There's always going to be toxicity, but like it's better handled now. It's not. There's no risk of it getting out and affecting our public perception as much as I say other years. But we've been pretty good at managing all that. A lot more responsibility. I think people are starting to get the weight of what a political party can be. So they're kind of restraining themselves from being those edgelords and detriments to the party.
Yeah. Well, the more of us that run for office, the more of us who become politicians rather than activists. I think it becomes, the party will become more of a political party. I've always said, that we have the United States, not just the libertarians, has an activist problem. Is activists drive far too much of the conversation, which driving the conversation is kind of one thing, but they drive far too much of the policy. Like here in California, activists essentially run the state, Democrat activists, they run the state. It's not Democrat politicians that run the state. It's the activists that run the state. And that's a problem because politicians, by their nature, they think about all the various competing moralities and whether they may land on one side or the other more often. They're actually taking the time to contemplate it. Activists, they don't think about it. They think about whatever they're activating about, and anything else kind of becomes secondary. Like it's AB5 here, this whole gig worker laws, right? There was the National Act. They've got a national act that they want to do now. They're talking about the AB5 National Act. It's where they're makes it very hard to be an independent contractor. And no matter how many times independent contractors saying, you guys aren't focusing on what we want, it says, well, you should want to be an employee. We don't want to be an employee. But these big evil corporations are abusing you. No, we don't want to be part of the big evil corporation. That's why we're independent contractors. We just want their money. We don't want to be tied to them. We just want their money. And they wouldn't listen. And they say, well, but being an employee is better. No, it's not.
Not always.
And there's times when it is. If you want to be an employee, great. But don't force those of us who don't want to be an employee into being an employee. And so that kind of, for me, I say there's an activist problem. And how we deal with that act. And problem is probably too strong of a word, because there's nothing inherently wrong with being an activist. It's when there's too many activists in the kitchen, right? You need a few activists in the kitchen. You need them. That's what the experiment. They help you, they make your food better. They tell you what you've done wrong. But you need the main chefs to do the main cooking. You need people who are not to be activists to do the cooking. And so we all talk about this, the issues with why is politics so toxic? Well, if you have a bunch of activists running politics, you're going to get a toxic political nature. It's just kind of
because the activists are very emotionally driven. They make the emotional cases, and then they want emotional policy. I mean, it makes sense. Look, when you're trying to engage the everyday voter, what's the easiest way to do that? Engage their emotions. And not much reason. But whereas politicians, different mindset. You have to very legal, very rigid standards. There's already precedents in place, and we have to think about those. Where in activism, just rally the troops, get them behind the cause, and force public pressure on the issue. Whereas politicians are like, all right, obviously they have to listen to public pressure because that's their job. They have to listen to the people. But it has to be very logical, make sense, as idealistic as that sounds, because sometimes.
Yeah, well, it's one of the things. It's literally impossible, right? You can't actually serve all the people, but you can listen to them. And, that's what I always say. You can't do what everything wants. It's not possible, but you can listen to everybody. You can make everybody feel heard. And the thing that irritates me enough is you get like activists to say, we are the 99%. Well, no, you're not. You clearly aren't speaking for 99% of the people. And so. And
especially like 99% of what? In what context? Like of America, maybe, but of the world, you are in the 1%. If you I think it's like if you make over 3,000, it's a very low number. That if you make over this amount of money, you're already in the 1% of the whole world, because just of how many people live in absolute poverty. It's like that run, like they're like, oh, we're oppressed here. Yeah, try living on dollars a day.
Our 99% is the 1% worldwide. It really is. It's kind
like,
of.
At what scale are we talking at here? Like,
but it's not even. It's like we speak for workers. Like, no, you don't. You speak for union workers, or you speak for your group. Like, I can't sit here and say I speak for everybody in Sacramento County. I can speak for the Libertarians of Sacramento County. I can maybe make an argument I speak for the 50,000 people who voted for me, at least for a short period of time. That's a tenuous argument at best, but I can, you can at least have some argument to it. But that's it. I can't say I speak for any more than that. It's because that's it. I'm chair of the Libertarian Party of Sacramento County. I can speak for the Libertarians of Sacramento County. That's it. That's all I get to speak for.
It's the same here. Like, I could speak for the 3.2% of people who voted for me. At the end of the day, you can only speak for yourself, I say. Like, we're all super individualistic. Like, you and I have different needs, different wants, different goals politically. And I can't say, oh, I speak for James here. Like, he's a libertarian. I'm speaking for him. Maybe on libertarian issues. Maybe. Because
well, yeah, right.
Because maybe one day you're like, Oscar's not a real libertarian. We'll get into those arguments.
Libertarians can't agree on the color blue.
It's actually teal.
That's not blue. That's sky of desert or desert sky or something. Yeah, who knows? We can't agree on anything. And if we do find something, if we do agree on something, they'll talk about it until they find something about it to disagree on. It's just our nature. Okay, so what did you learn about yourself, Oscars? We got a few minutes before we'll let you go. What did you learn about yourself? I learned that, my journey is not over. I'd kind of thought I went from a person who had been homebound, literally 15 years ago, I couldn't leave the house. And now I run for office, have, host of TV shows and do all that kind of thing. And I learned that I was much more ready for this type of thing than I thought I was. Mm-hmm. And I learned that I didn't have to work as hard as I thought I was going to have to slip into that politician mindset. So, at the end of the day, when you kind of reflect back on your journey, what did you learn about yourself?
That I'm capable of more things than I originally thought of, because I always viewed I've always been the quiet guy, back of the classroom, just minding his own business. And now I have to be the politician up front, the leader of the group, the spokesperson. And I always hated public speaking. But I did one event like in October, and I wasn't prepared at all for this. I hyped myself up listening to speeches I know, like I listened to a rendition of Alexander the Great's Opus speech, a lot of Winston Churchill, a lot of Reagan. Winston Churchill and Ronald Reagan I consider my speaker role models. I just love the way they speak, and I always say about Ronald Reagan, regardless of your views of his politics, you can't help but be stirred to emotion by his speeches. And that's kind of what I aspire to. So, and then I had the mayor of the city come up to me and it's like, you know what? I can't believe, how old are you? 24 at the time. I'm like, what? 24 and you're already out speaking all these people who've been in politics for like years and decades. And I realized then that I was finding my voice, my passion, what I was good at, and that was public speaking, something I always hated. So I was like, I overcame some fears in that regard, not to be afraid to put my voice out there, not to be afraid to take charge, take lead, that I actually am capable of change in whatever capacity, that people actually do look up to me, and they still do. It's weird getting stopped still on the street, like, hey, you're Oscar, you ran for office. Yeah, I voted for you. It's nice to actually meet you now. So it's not to be afraid that I am capable of these things, to be out there, be not so afraid of taking the charge and standing up. And really, the big thing was just finding my voice and utilizing it. And I don't think this is going to be the last time I run for office. I'll probably give it another 4 years, take a good break.
Take a break, consider making, yeah, no, go ahead, please.
And really establish myself as a presence in some way or form in the community. Obviously, still comment on political happenings in Ohio and the community, and maybe go again in 4 years for state rep. I think it was a good start, and I think it still remains a good start for politics. But next time I run, I'll be closer to 30, so a little bit more realistic of an age for a state representative than 24, even though the next youngest one is 25, I believe. So if I won, I would have been the youngest person there, but that's behind me now.
Yeah, well, it's a great learning experience, right?
Yeah, it definitely is. I think it really brought me out of this little shell I was in. And I'm happy it did, because now I'm just like looking back to life before the election. I'm like, yeah, I can't return to that. I like this a little bit too much. not in a narcissistic, like I love the attention way, but we all love the attention anyway. But it's more like I enjoy talking to voters, engaging with people, seeing what they're about and what matters to them.
Yeah. Well, you're a different Oscar now.
Yeah.
You're a vastly different Oscar. You've kind of gone through an experience that you carried a weight for an extended period of time. It's not like you did it for a few months. You carried a weight for an extended period of time. You learned a lot from it, and you became a solid member of your community, a leader in your community, if we want to use that, leader or representative. I prefer the term representative rather than leader, but you've become a representative of your community. And, that's something. There's weight to that. There's what's the word? Gravitas to that. You're no longer Oscar Herrera, the young kid. You're Oscar Herrera, the accomplished man. And I think that's you should be applauded. I applaud any young person. At 24-year-old, I was raising kids and, working 3 jobs. So, it is what it is. It's its own burden, right? And so you took a different burden of trying to, make your community better. And if you had something to give to young people in their early 20s who are out watching what's going on in the world today, regardless of their politics, whatever their politics is, what kind of advice would you maybe give them if they're considering diving more into their politics?
So I just say go for it. Don't be afraid. I mean, I was very afraid at the start of it, but you find some courage in the midst of it and just take that first step, because after that it just snowballs. Is there going to be moments when you feel like giving up? Of course. There's been moments in 2 or 3 times in my campaign that I seriously considered dropping out, but I already committed to it, and I was like, there's people who invested in this, and I don't want to let them down, and I don't want to let myself down. But yeah, anyone, because I got involved in politics when I was 17, help campaigns, not just get to it, get to work. There's always something. That's pretty much all I have to say.
Well, there's value in the experience. If nothing else, there's value in the experience, and for me, there's nothing to be afraid of. And the worst thing that can happen is you can say something stupid and destroy your political career. That's literally the worst thing that can happen. And so, but
then you could bounce back.
Yeah, and if you're young, you can bounce back from that. If you're old like me, it ends your career because I'm 50 and there's no time to bounce back. But if you're young, you can bounce back. You can rebuild it. And so, but even if you're old and 50 like me, there's nothing to be afraid of. I don't have a political career, so if I say something stupid and destroy my political career, I didn't have one. So there's, you didn't have one before. So there's literally nothing to be afraid of. And your engagement can only help you and your community. And so I think if there's a lesson to be learned from my run for office, it's that it's good for yourself, and anything that's good for yourself ultimately becomes good for your family and your community. And, anytime you can learn something. Now, one more question. Is there anything about the game of politics that surprised you? I was surprised at how bad the grift was in politics. Like I spent $3,400, something like that. My opponent raised $900,000, didn't have to spend any of it. I think that was $600,000. Sorry, 900 was a guy I was helping out, and didn't have to spend a dime because he's an incumbent, name recognition, and all that. And so you're going, why are we raising money? Why are people donating money to a candidate that doesn't need any? And so I learned a lot about grift in tracking down how that thing works. What did you learn about anything?
The thing about grift, it's like there are some people who were attaching themselves to, mostly on the Republican side, but everyone was attaching themselves to the bigger leagues, like oh, this person's attached to this, like Trump or Biden. They're just attaching themselves to bigger names because obviously that it helps out a lot, but also how well connected everyone is. Like Democrats, Republicans are they love to play the theater. They're against each other, but going to these events, they're buddy. It's like I knew that going in, but just they were talking to each other like they knew each other for years. And obviously smaller towns you do, but it's just once the curtain's gone, every curtain's closed, behind the stage, everyone's buddy, and I just like
Yeah.
it surprised me how friendly everyone is. There was like they were sparring on stage, but come back, they were giving each other hugs, high fives. Hey, good to see you, Bill, and all that. And I'm just like, oh my god, and like. I mean,
the world is but a stage.
The world, yeah, exactly. You just made it realize it even more once you're in there, and especially as outsider, I couldn't just go up to people like they could. So it's like, oh man, I really need to like get connected with these people.
Yeah, it's crazy. It is crazy.
Yeah.
Well, for me, the grift is strange because I was talking to somebody and said, I just got like 4 of the same mailers from a particular political candidate on the same day, the exact same mailer on the exact same day. So I said, well, why are you wasting money? From a marketing perspective, the way they do mailers and all this stuff doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
It doesn't make it. You're literally throwing money away. So why would you be throwing money away? Well, wait a minute. You're paying a printer. That printer and that same printer probably does a lot of printing for that particular party in the area. Mm-hmm. Then that printer gives campaign contributions back to the party or it's all a big grift. And it's not even a deliberate grift. A lot of it's an accidental grift. You end up accidentally getting loyalty to a politician or party because they give you legitimate business. Like, it's a legitimate printing business. Maybe you're a lean Democrat anyway, but after 5-6 years of being the printer for that particular party, well, you've now got an economic incentive to help that party. Mm-hmm. And there's nothing wrong with it, but it's kind of an unintentional grift. It's unintentional corruption, and it leads to this kind of weird structure that we've got now. And quite frankly, I don't have the slightest idea what to do about it. I'm sitting here, I'm looking at it, I'm going, this is ugly. Mm-hmm. This is really ugly. And it struck me as the same way as that candidate handbook you get when you get here's your handbook to run for office. Yeah, it's like your 3-year plan, your 2-year plan, whatever it is. Like every single candidate gets that, unless you're like me who run in the short term. Well, and it's fine. There's nothing wrong with it inherently, except when every single candidate does it. Then everybody has the same perspective. Everybody has the same power structure behind them, and there's no way to kind of balance that out. You've got this. Everybody has their own little power structures they have to feed, that they have to maintain. And the power structure itself has their own power structures to feed and maintain. And it's just this one big, whole ugly grift that I don't have the slightest idea what to do about. And how do we unwind that? No, I don't know. It's not a question, Oscar. That's just a statement. It's just my rant for the day.
Oh, yeah. Don't get me started on mailers. Those are a nightmare to deal with. I had to do a few. And I never realized how expensive they were until like I have to figuratively sign that check for mailers. I'm like, oh my God, I'm spending how much on them? And then seeing how many I got throughout the campaign from like the Republicans, and I'm like, I'm not voting for you guys, at least some of you guys, because like county level stuff, I met the candidates and I agreed with them. So it's like I'm getting all these Trump campaigns, Biden stuff. And I'm not talking about little postcards, like the whole pamphlet. I'm like, I know how much those cost.
I don't have it. And then they said the same ones 3-4 times a week. And from a marketing perspective, it makes no sense because if you didn't read it the first time, you're not going to read it the second time in the same week. If you send it once every 10 days, maybe, because then you can see it and someone will pick it up. But if you're sending it 3-4 times a week, they're just throwing it away. It does, from a marketing perspective, it's literally a waste of money. So the question is, and they know it, because if I know it, they know it. And so then why are they doing it? And it's payback. It's all the grift.
Yeah, it's all the grift. I read them because I just want to see what everyone else was doing. And I was just cringing at some of the stuff that some candidates did. And I'm like, I know you. You're not that.
Yeah, I know you're not that. And it's like, I don't want to do it because I didn't want to do mailers because I don't want to be associated with the toxic nature of those mailers. They're so toxic. I said, I don't even want to think about the mailers because people are going to get mailers. They're going to see my name. They're not going to read the mailers. They're going to assume I'm as toxic as everybody else and just throw it away. I'd rather we did, the literature drops is kind of what we ended up doing. I did literature drops and my videos on Facebook, and I'm lucky I get to be on public access every week as a TV host. So, I get a little more name recognition than other people might get, and it's grassroots name recognition. It's kind of the best kind you can get. So I had some advantages, but still, Oscar, it's been great talking to you. I appreciate you stopping by. We're going to have to get you on the flagship Counterpoint one day to sit here and talk about issues of the day when we can get your schedule, when we can match schedules on that.
Yeah. My schedule's going to be really off now.
Yeah. No. And have fun with that. On your journey through your National Guard. It's, anybody who serves their community, I have a great respect for, because I couldn't do it. I'm far too much of a hippie. I couldn't do I couldn't have people telling me what to do all day.
Oh, I know it's gonna be a discipline for me to do that, but thank you for the support.
No. Hey man, I know some libertarians can kind of have mixed feelings on military service, even National Guard service. So, but I think most people have been happy for you because, found a direction.
Yeah, everyone's been supportive so far. So
that's good. And if anybody's not supportive, send them my way. I'll take care of them for you. All right. That's all we've got for today, Oscar. Thank you for joining us. You can catch us at, let me get these things up. I completely forgot about banners. I was so interested in our conversation. You can catch us at libertariancounterpoint.com. You can catch the normal podcasts at Anchor FM /Libertarian Counterpoint and the Facebook /The Libertarian Counterpoint. I don't know why we had to do that. So it is. Oscar, it's been great talking to you. For everybody else, thanks for listening. And please remember to love everybody.